This black soldier is ignored and disrespected by the waitress at a restaurant, who refuses to take her orders. So the next day she returns and does the unthinkable. Please like and subscribe to follow interesting and meaningful stories. Samantha Moore stepped out of the airport, feeling the cool breeze of home after long months in Afghanistan. The hustle and bustle of the city seemed to wash away some of the fatigue from the long flight. As she looked around, she noticed a small restaurant with warm lights and delicious smells wafting out of the window. Tomorrow's breakfast is sorted, she thought, allowing herself to look forward to a simple, peaceful moment. The next morning, after a restful night's sleep, Samantha remembered the promise she made to herself. She dressed casually, like any other civilian, wanting to experience the everyday simplicity of a life she had been separated from for so long. It only took her 15 minutes to reach the restaurant she had seen the day before. The place wasn't too crowded, with many empty tables. Good, she thought, hoping for a calm breakfast. Samantha picked a table by the window, sat down, and waited for the server to take her order. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She started to notice something odd. Other customers were being served, but no one approached her. At first, she thought maybe the server was busy. But when she saw the waitress, whose name tag read Sandra, clearly ignoring her, Samantha began to feel uneasy. She tried to wave her hand to get Sandra's attention, but the waitress simply glared at her, then turned away as if Samantha didn't exist. At first, Samantha wondered what was happening. Was the restaurant too busy, or was Sandra just having a bad day? But as Sandra continued to serve others while deliberately ignoring her, it became clear something was wrong. After 20 minutes of being overlooked, Samantha couldn't take it anymore. When Sandra approached the table next to hers to serve a couple, Samantha decided to call out once more. But instead of a polite response, Sandra turned to her, a cold expression on her face. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her tone dripping with impatience. Samantha was shocked. She kept calm, taking a deep breath, recalling the discipline she'd learned in the military. "I just want to order," she said calmly. But before she could finish, Sandra rudely interrupted her. "We're out of food." Samantha was stunned. Clearly, Sandra had been serving food to others the entire time. So how could they be out of food? She pointed out the inconsistency, but Sandra only shrugged, her face showing complete disdain. And then came the words that knocked the breath out of Samantha. "Don't you understand? We don't serve your kind here." The restaurant fell silent. All eyes were on Samantha. She felt a deep, gut-wrenching pain, not from hunger, but from the injustice she was experiencing. She glanced around and realized the difference. She was the only person of color in the restaurant. Everyone else was white. She hadn't noticed it at first, but now it was obvious. Sandra had ignored her simply because she was black. Anger surged inside Samantha, but she kept her composure. She stood up, her eyes cold as she locked her gaze on Sandra, then walked out of the restaurant without another word. Samantha Moore sat in her car the next morning, staring at the entrance of the restaurant, her heart pounding. The humiliation from the day before still haunted her, playing over and over in her mind like a film that wouldn't stop. She had faced dangers on the battlefield, but this injustice, this was different. Yesterday, she had walked away in silence, but today, she wouldn't. Samantha opened the car door, stepped out, this time wearing her uniform. The same uniform she had worn countless times on the battlefield, a symbol of her sacrifice and service. The medals on her chest gleamed, small marks of her bravery and unshakable resolve. She walked into the restaurant without hesitation. Conversations paused as people noticed her. Samantha chose the same table as the day before, sitting down calmly. Sandra spotted her from behind the counter. Confusion flickered across her face, and her hands fumbled slightly as she held a tray. This time she couldn't avoid her. Sandra walked over, her tone no longer arrogant, but still tinged with coldness. "You came back?" Samantha met her eyes, her voice steady but firm. "Yes. I came back to finish the meal you refused to serve me yesterday." Sandra froze, unable to respond. The restaurant patrons fell silent, their attention on the two women. "I serve this country," Samantha said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of her words. And I won't let anyone treat me like I don't belong, especially in a country I fought to protect. The silence in the restaurant grew heavier. No one dared to meet Samantha's gaze, but they all felt the power in her words. Sandra, realizing there was no escape, finally nodded stiffly and wrote down her order without another word. When the food was served, Samantha ate in quiet dignity, every bite affirming her worth and right to be respected. She didn't need to do anything extreme or unthinkable. Simply standing up for herself, claiming her rightful place, was enough. When she finished, she left a generous tip on the table, stood tall, and walked out of the restaurant with her head held high, never looking back. Today she had reclaimed her respect, not just from Sandra, but from everyone in that room. And for her, that was the greatest victory. Samantha felt a quiet storm brewing within her as she stood, her uniform pristine and a stark contrast to the roiling emotions beneath. The restaurant fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. All eyes were on her, the soldier who had commanded respect with her mere presence. Yet just yesterday, she had been someone else entirely in their eyes. The applause had rung hollow to her, an uncomfortable reminder that their respect was conditional. It wasn't her humanity they celebrated, it was her rank, her medals, her prestige. If not for her accolades, she knew they would have seen her the same way they had seen her yesterday. Just another face, another body, subject to their contempt because of her skin. She met Sandra's gaze, the waitress's wide eyes betraying her fear. Gone was the arrogance, the casual cruelty from the day before. Samantha could see the flicker of recognition, the panic that set in as the weight of her actions came crashing down. But the soldier wasn't interested in fear or regret. She wanted justice, real justice. Clearing her throat, Samantha spoke, her voice calm but edged with the steel she had earned through years of service. "It's funny, isn't it?" she began, turning to face the room. "How quickly the way you treat someone can change when you know who they are. Yesterday, I was no one to you. I was just a woman trying to have a meal. But that didn't matter, because what you saw wasn't me. It was the color of my skin." A murmur rippled through the room, some patrons shifting uncomfortably in their seats, others too stunned to move. Samantha didn't waver. The waitress, Sandra, made sure I knew that I wasn't welcome here. The manager? She backed her up, even encouraged it. And you all, she gestured broadly to the diners, sat there and did nothing. No one spoke up. No one cared. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The silence was deafening now, every person in the room frozen by the truth they had ignored. Samantha took a slow breath, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. You see me now, in this uniform, and you clap, you smile. But yesterday, I was still the same person. Still a soldier. Still someone who has risked her life for this country. Yet all you saw was someone you thought you could look down on. Sandra flinched as Samantha's gaze returned to her, the weight of the soldier's words pressing down. But I'm not here for your pity, and I don't need your applause. Samantha stepped forward, her presence commanding, her voice steady. What I want, what I demand, is accountability. The second manager, Darlene, had been inching closer, her expression one of desperation to placate the situation. "Ma'am, please," she began, her voice trembling. We had no idea who you were. If we had known..." "That's the problem," Samantha cut her off, her voice cold and sharp. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. And I'm not asking for special treatment because of my rank. I'm asking for basic human decency." Samantha's eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of each customer. Racism doesn't just happen because of one person. It happens because people stay silent. It happens because people look away. And that silence, that indifference, makes you complicit. A heavy stillness settled over the diner, the weight of Samantha's words sinking in. Sandra stood frozen, pale, her hands trembling at her sides. Darlene, too, looked stricken, realizing the gravity of the moment. Samantha exhaled slowly, feeling the tension release from her shoulders. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said, her voice softer now but no less firm. I came here because I refuse to let what happened to me happen to anyone else. She turned toward the door, her back straight and her head held high. If this restaurant is going to continue to operate, changes need to be made. You need to make those changes. Not because I'm a decorated soldier, but because it's the right thing to do. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing back at Sandra, who stood frozen in place. And you, Samantha said, her voice low but resolute, should think long and hard about the choices you make. Because the next person who walks in here, they may not have the power to demand respect like I do, but they deserve it just the same. With that, Samantha walked out, her security detail following close behind. The diner was left in stunned silence, the weight of the moment lingering long after she was gone. And for the first time, the people inside were forced to confront the reality of their actions, their silence, and what it truly meant to treat someone with dignity. Samantha sat at the edge of her bed, the weight of the past 2 days settling heavily on her chest. The message from her sister still flashed on the screen, a link to the video that had flipped her world upside down. She clicked it again, as if watching it for the 10th time might change what was unfolding. There she was, standing in her uniform, her voice thick with pain, narrating the injustice she'd faced at the diner. Her hands trembled as she heard her own words, a piercing reminder of how deeply yesterday's encounter had shaken her. She'd just wanted a quiet meal to celebrate being home, to feel human again after months of service. But instead she'd walked into a storm of hatred. Sandra's eyes, cold and judgmental, flickered in her mind. And then there was the man. She could still hear his voice in her head, calling her a monkey as she left. The way his words slithered under her skin, eating at her resolve. Samantha had tried to stay calm, to make them understand. Humans were humans, no matter the skin color. Yet, there was a fire inside her, a quiet rage that had built over the years, stoked by moments like this, where dignity was stripped away for no reason other than her race. But she hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to become the face of a viral movement, the spark that ignited a citywide firestorm. The video had done more than just expose her humiliation. It had given others a voice. Suddenly there were people coming forward, recounting their own horrors from that diner and places like it. The swell of anger had grown louder, and now the restaurant was at risk of shutting down. Darlene's tearful apology from yesterday echoed in her ears. She'd fired Sandra on the spot, had promised to make things right. Darlene, who seemed to understand, she had biracial children, had seen her own family struggle against the same hatred. And yet, here Samantha was, the unintended catalyst for a wave of fury that threatened to drown everything in its path, even the good. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her sister. Have you seen this? The mayor's involved now. You should talk to him. The mayor. A sinking feeling tugged at her gut. Samantha had never asked for this. She hadn't asked to become a symbol of resistance, hadn't meant to turn one painful encounter into a nationwide conversation. But that's what it had become. The mayor wanted to use her story as a learning moment, a beacon for change. But at what cost? Darlene's livelihood, the jobs of others at that diner, the place itself, it all hung in the balance. Later that evening, she sat in the mayor's office trying to explain herself once more, her words faltering as the pressure mounted. Why had this happened? Why was she here? The mayor, though sympathetic, seemed more focused on the optics of the situation than the emotional toll it had taken on her. He wanted her to stand with him, to speak on national television about racism, about healing, about change. Samantha nodded, agreeing to the plan, though a storm brewed inside her. She hadn't expected the video to spread like wildfire. And now, she was expected to be a hero, a savior for people who'd suffered like her. But deep down, she felt like an imposter. Her fight had been personal, born from raw pain. She hadn't meant to start a movement. The next day, standing beside the mayor in front of the cameras, Samantha recounted the incident again. This time, her voice was steadier, more controlled. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was restrained. The mayor made his demands, and the restaurant owner's public apology followed soon after. The owner's voice trembled with regret, promising that things would change. The hate would stop. The staff would be trained. Racism would not be tolerated. The outrage began to ebb as the days passed, but Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had shifted forever. She returned to the restaurant months later, not because she wanted closure, but because she needed to know if any of it had mattered. When she walked through the doors, she was no longer the target of suspicion. The faces that greeted her were different, diverse, warm. The air felt lighter, less poisoned by judgment. As she sat down to eat, Samantha felt an odd sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. But the question that lingered in her mind was one she couldn't escape. Had she done the right thing? Would she have been better off staying silent, walking away from the fight that had thrust her into the spotlight? She couldn't answer that. Not yet. But for now, as she watched the smiles around her, she allowed herself to believe that somehow, through the chaos, she had made a difference.